Hi, friend. Welcome to Rainy Tailies, a quiet place for gentle stories told beneath the sound of rain. Here, the world slows down for a while. The rain falls softly outside, and we listen to the small moments that often go unnoticed. Memories, letters, thoughts, and dreams. Each story you'll hear tonight is meant to bring calm to your mind and warmth to your heart. So find a cozy spot, let the rain keep you company, and allow your thoughts to drift with the sound. Now, let's begin tonight's story. It had been raining for hours, not a fierce, thrashing kind of rain, just a soft, unhurried drizzle that painted the windows in glistening lines and made the garden blur like an old watercolor. The world outside seemed to lean inwards, hushed by the steady whisper of water falling on leaves, on stones, on the curled petals of hydrangeas drooping by the gate. You could hear it in the rhythm of the gutters, the occasional drip from the porch roof, and the light tapping against the kitchen window. Inside, the house was warm, not just warm in temperature, but in spirit. It had always been that way, Grandma's house. The kind of warmth that lived in worn wooden floors, and in the way the amber light from a single lamp could stretch through the quiet like a reaching hand. That lamp still sat on the little table by the hallway, its yellow glow casting soft-edged shadows against the floral wallpaper that had faded slightly more each year. The front door gave a familiar creak as it opened, not out of protest, but as if it was waking up from a long nap. Stepping over the threshold was like entering a memory that had waited patiently for your return. The smell met me first a blend of old books, something sweet and citrusy from the linen drawer, and rain-soaked wood. I left my umbrella leaning in the corner and kicked off my wet shoes, setting them carefully on the mat she used to crochet from rags. My socks made soft prints on the wood as I walked deeper into the home. Every step a quiet hello. She wasn't here anymore. Not in the way she used to be. But somehow, in every corner, in every cushion and half-read book, she was everywhere. The kitchen hadn't changed. The teapot still sat on the stove, round and proud, its floral enamel chipped in two places. The old tea towels one, with a faded strawberry print hung by the sink. On the counter, a ceramic bowl held a few wrinkled apples, as though expecting someone to come slice them for pie. I reached for the kettle and filled it with water, the echo of the tap mixing with the rain outside. Chamomile, that was always her choice on rainy afternoons. Something about the way it smelled when it steeped, the golden color blooming slowly in the cup, like patience made visible. As I waited for the water to boil, I wandered toward the sitting room. The air was thick with silence, not the lonely kind, but the kind that lets you listen. To the tick of the old wall clock, to the rain's soft percussion on the roof, to the sound of your own breath, slowing without you noticing. There was a window seat in that room, long and narrow, with a cushion that had faded to a muted gray blue, pressed into shape by decades of sitting, reading, daydreaming. I slid into it and rested my forehead against the cool glass, watching the branches outside sway with gentle resignation. I remembered afternoons just like this, not me. No taller than the windowsill, clutching a biscuit in one hand and a book in the other. Grandma beside me, her reading glasses low on her nose, a half-knitted scarf pooling in her lap. She'd hum sometimes not a song you'd recognize, just a tune she seemed to carry in her bones. I used to think she knew the words the rain was whispering. The kettle whistled, breaking the spell. I padded back into the kitchen and poured the hot water over the dried blossoms in 2 cups mine, and one for her. A habit I hadn't shaken, and didn't want to. The scent of honey and apple drifted upward, curling around my face, soothing something I hadn't even known was tense. I took both cups and returned to the window seat, placing hers on the table beside the lamp, where he could steep in the light. And then I just sat. No need for a phone. No urge to scroll, or post, or text. Just the tea warming my hands, and the soft drum of rain above, and the silence that knew my name. Somehow, in that house, time stopped needing to make sense. It didn't rush. It didn't pull. It simply stood still, like an old friend who'd saved her seat. And that's how the afternoon began, not with a bang, or a door flung open, but with rain and the sound of a kettle, and the quiet return to a place that still remembered how to hold you. The tea was still warm in my hands when I noticed it, the way the steam rose slowly, curling toward the ceiling, like it was trying to tell a story. It reminded me of her, of the way she used to pour her tea just so, letting it sit a while before taking a sip. Let it settle, she'd say. Everything tastes better when it's had time to rest. That was her way, always. She moved through life like the tea she brewed slow, steeped in intention, never rushing a moment. Even when things were hard, she never let them rush her. She believed in warmth, in kindness, in holding space for quiet things. I took a sip, and the taste bloomed gently floral, a little sweet, and somehow familiar in a way I could never fully name. Like a memory that didn't belong to a single moment, but rather 1,000 of them, layered softly over time. Outside, the rain deepened, growing into a steadier rhythm. I could hear it hitting the gutters now, and the soft splashes as water pooled beneath the garden bench. Every so often, a gust of wind would sweep across the porch, rattling the chimes she'd hung there years ago. They played a melancholy tune, something like the opening of an old lullaby. I leaned back into the cushions and looked toward the kitchen. The door to the pantry was ajar, and something about it made me smile. That pantry had been magic when I was little Dot. It wasn't just a place for flour and jam and herbs, hanging upside down from twine. It was where she kept her tin box, a small, square thing, pale blue, with a rusting hinge and a tiny daisy painted in the corner. She used to keep letters in it, old ones, tied with string. I never asked whose they were, but once, when I was about 8, I caught her holding one against her chest, eyes closed, lips not moving, but whispering all the same. Now, on this rainy afternoon, something in me stirred. Maybe it was the sound of the storm, or the weight of the years, or simply that kind of ache that grows louder in quiet places. I set my tea down, stood up, and made my way into the pantry. The air inside was cooler, touched by earth and old wood. The shelves still held her preserves, some cloudy with time. Labels faded into ghostwriting. And there it was, on the middle shelf, tucked behind a jar of rosehip syrup, the tin box. I paused a moment, as if to ask for permission, though no one else was there. Then I lifted it gently, the metal colder than I expected, and brought it to the kitchen table. Dot. It creaked when I opened it. Dot. Inside, envelopes. Dozens, maybe more. Some yellowed, some crisp. 1 or 2 were still sealed, the wax stamped with a small heart. Others had been opened and refolded many times, edges worn soft by fingers that knew them well. I didn't read them. Not yet. Instead, I ran my thumb along the top of one, feeling the slight texture of the handwriting. Her handwriting. Always neat, with a tilt like it leaned in to tell you a secret. There was a postcard, 2-dot sepia-dash tone, with a picture of a lighthouse and the sea foaming wild against the rocks. On the back, a message half written. Dear today, the wind nearly carried my hat into the ocean. You would have laughed. I stood on the edge and shouted your name. Not because I thought you could hear me, but because I needed to remember the sound of it. There was no signature. I sat back, holding the card in both hands. The rain grew louder just then, like it was pressing its palms against the house. And for a moment, I felt it, that deep, aching kind of love that doesn't ask to be understood. The kind that just ... is. I thought about who she might have written it for. A lover, perhaps. Someone from before my time. Or maybe a sister, or a friend she'd lost too soon. It didn't matter. What mattered was the feeling she'd sealed into that paper. The kind that lasts longer than even memory can hold. The kettle hissed again, as if reminding me to breathe. I returned the letters to the box, closed the lid softly, and carried it back to the pantry. Not everything needs to be open to be felt. Some things are meant to rest, steeped in their own quiet grace. When I returned to the sitting room, the tea was lukewarm. But I drank it anyway, because sometimes warmth isn't just about temperature. Sometimes it's about the stories we carry. And the ones that carry us. The cushion sighed beneath me as I settled back into the window seat, teacup in hand, the tin box now tucked away once more where it had always belonged. Rain still pressed gently on the windows, steady and sure, like it knew how to be patient. I looked out at the garden dot. It had overgrown since the last time I was here. Ivy crept along the fence like green lace, and the flower beds were tangled with stubborn marigolds and sleepy daisies, drooping under the weight of the rain. The bird bath was full, a puddle within a bowl of stone, reflecting nothing but gray sky and the swaying shadow of the old oak tree. And yet, it was beautiful, wild and a little messy. Yes, but alive. I used to sit right here and draw that garden. Colored pencils clutched in small hands, tongue poking out in concentration. Grandma would lean over my shoulder and smile, always with that same word, lovely. No matter how crooked the lines, how strange the colors I chose. Lovely, she'd say, because you made it. That was the kind of magic she had. Not the loud kind. Not spells or potions or show. Just the kind of magic that made you believe that what you made, what you felt was enough. I reached for the small bookshelf beside the window dot, its shelves bowed in the middle, worn from years of cradling paperbacks and old magazines. Most of the books were familiar, the ones she used to read aloud on rainy days, her voice curling through the room like a thread of candle smoke. I ran my fingers across the spines until I found one with a cracked leather cover. The Secret Garden dot, of course. She'd read it to me over and over, always stopping at the same line. Where you tend a rose, a thistle cannot grow. She'd close the book, press her hand gently to her chest, and say, that's not just for gardens. You know. I pulled the book down and flipped through it slowly. Pages soft as fabric, corners folded from bookmarks long lost. And then I found it tucked between chapter 11 and 12, a square of paper with a faint watercolor painted across it. 2 teacups and a plate of cinnamon biscuits, outlined in blue and brown. Childish and uneven dot, it was mine. A painting I'd made at the kitchen table one rainy summer afternoon when I was 9. I could remember it so clearly. The way she'd made the biscuits, warm and fragrant, the kitchen filled with the scent of butter and sugar, and something deeply comforting. She'd set the tray beside me while I painted and said, draw this one, and I'll frame it. She never did frame it, but she kept it between pages of a story she knew I'd return to. I smiled, touched the edge of the paper, and let the memory rise like steam from a freshly poured cup. Dot, it had rained that day. 2 Dot, we had watched it from the porch swing, our feet wrapped in wool socks, a quilt draped across our knees. She had told me that the sound of rain was nature's way of slowing us down. It washes the world, she'd whispered, and sometimes it washes us too. I hadn't understood it then. I do now. I closed the book and leaned back against the window, letting my gaze soften. The light had dimmed slightly, the clouds thickening with the weight of the storm. Somewhere, a branch tapped against the side of the house. A rhythmic knock, dash, knock, dash, knock, as if asking to be let in. The tea was gone, but the warmth lingered in my hands. I wrapped the quilt from the window seat around my shoulders and curled up, knees tucked close. The house felt even quieter, now not empty, just listening. I closed my eyes for a moment and let my breath fall into rhythm with the rain dot, and in that space between waking and dreaming, I heard her voice. Not loudly, not clearly, just a soft hum, like it had always been there, hidden beneath the hush of water and wood and memory. You're home, it seemed to say. And that's enough. I didn't need to answer. The house already knew. The scent of cinnamon drifted into my thoughts before I even realized I had begun to imagine it. Sweet, warm, wrapped in memory like a wool shawl around the shoulders. Cinnamon meant only one thing in this house, her biscuits dot, and somehow I found myself rising, carried by the soft pull of nostalgia, moving into the kitchen without thinking. The rain had not let up, and the windows were fogged with the breath of the storm. I wiped one clear with my sleeve as I passed, peering out into the silver-drenched world beyond. The porch swing moved gently, untouched, its cushions darkened by water. The chimes were silent now, resting between Gust's dock in the kitchen. I opened the cupboard where she used to keep her ingredients. To my surprise, everything was still there. Jars of flour and sugar, a half-used tin of baking powder, and a small bottle labeled vanilla in her handwriting. Even the cinnamon, slightly clumped in the glass jar, waited patiently like it knew I'd return one day. I gathered what I needed with care, each movement slow, intentional. Measuring flour into the ceramic bowl, we always used the one with the blue speckles and a chip on the rim. Cutting in the cold butter, the way she taught me, with 2 knives crossed again and again until the mixture looked like wet sand. A pinch of salt, a spoonful of sugar, a whisper of cinnamon. The oven, ancient and temperamental, protested a little as I turned the dial. I smiled at that. She used to say it had a mind of its own. Be gentle, she chuckled, patting its side. It likes to be coaxed, not commanded. As the biscuits baked, the house began to fill with that unmistakable scent-rich and golden and impossibly comforting. I stood near the stove, arms folded across my chest, letting the warmth soak into my skin. The rain changed, just a little. Not quieter, but more distant somehow, like it was stepping back to give this moment space. I set the table for one, just one plate, just one cup, but halfway through, I stopped. I opened the cupboard again and took out a second teacup, the one with the tiny crack running down the handle, the one she always used. I set it across from mine. 2 cups, side by side, waiting. The timer rang, and I pulled the tray from the oven. They looked just as they used to, golden brown on the edges, soft in the center, their tops brushed with milk and dusted with sugar that had melted into tiny, glistening spots. I placed 2 on each plate and carried them to the table, and then I sat. I didn't eat at first. I just looked. The room hadn't changed much. Still the same curtains with the little embroidered apples. The same light fixture humming faintly overhead. The same wall clock, ticking in a rhythm that matched my breath. But in that moment, everything felt different. Like the past had pulled up a chair and joined me. I reached for the biscuit and took a bite. It was perfect. Not because I'd made it well, but because it brought her back. In the warmth of cinnamon and the crumble of the dough, in the way the sugar melted on my tongue, I could almost hear her laugh. That soft, contented laugh that always started in her chest and ended in her eyes. I closed mine and leaned back, chewing slowly. And then, without meaning to, I began to speak. Do you remember? I whispered. The time I spilled the whole bag of flour across the floor? No answer, of course. But the room listened. You didn't even get mad. You just knelt down beside me, drew a little smiley face in the flour, and said, "Now it's a snow day." I laughed softly into the quiet, and then I just sat there, biscuit half eaten, tea going cold, the storm outside still gently singing. I didn't need anyone to answer. I didn't need a sign or a ghost or a voice from beyond Dot. Just this was enough. 2 cups of tea, a plate of warm biscuits, and the feeling, however impossible, that someone I loved was sitting right across from me, smiling still. Later in the afternoon, when the rain had softened into a faint patter like fingertips on silk, I climbed the stairs toward the attic. It wasn't a plan, just a pull, the kind of pull that comes from somewhere deeper than memory, part instinct, part longing. The wooden steps creaked underfoot, old as the house itself, each one holding a note in a song I hadn't heard in years. At the top, the door stuck a little, swollen from years of humidity and change. I leaned my shoulder into it gently until it gave way with a quiet sigh. The air inside was different, thinner, dusted with stillness. Light filtered through a round. Window at the far end, muted by the drizzle outside, painting soft shapes on the floorboards. The attic smelled of cedar, mothballs, and stories. Boxes were stacked like puzzle pieces, some marked with years, others with no label at all. A wicker basket held folded quilts, one of which I remembered curling under while watching thunderstorms through the living room window. There were trunks, heavy and brass-cornered, tucked in shadow, and a wooden rocking horse missing one ear Dot, and in the far corner, almost hidden, beneath a sheet stood the vanity. Her vanity. I walked toward it slowly, the floor whispering beneath my steps. The sheet was soft with dust, but beneath it, the polished wood still held a trace of luster. I pulled it off carefully and revealed the mirror, tall and oval, framed by 2 curved drawers on either side. The mirror was cloudy with age, and yet I could still see myself blurred, softened, like an echo of who I used to be, like a child looking at their older self through a dream. I sat. The old stool creaked under me. On the vanity's surface, scattered like thoughts left behind, were small things. A hairbrush with her silver strands still caught between the bristles. A bottle of perfume with only a whisper of scent left inside, and a brooch shaped like a leaf, its green stone dulled but not forgotten. I opened one of the drawers and found a small music box square, wooden, with a tiny brass key tucked inside. I turned it gently just once, and it clicked softly before beginning to play. The melody was delicate, almost hesitant, like it too had aged in solitude. It filled the attic with something more than sound. A presence, a hush that held memory in its arms. I closed my eyes and let it wash over me, Dot, and in that moment, I saw her. Not as she was at the end, frail and folded into the hospital sheets, but as she had always been in this house, standing in the kitchen, apron dusted with flour, humming to herself, reading on the porch swing, kneeling in the garden, soil on her gloves and sun in her hair. She turned toward me in that memory. Or maybe it was imagination, or maybe just the heart remembering in pictures. She smiled, and in her smile was every soft thing I had ever known. When the music stopped, I stayed still a little longer. I didn't cry. There were no tears left to fall, not out of sadness, anyway. Only the kind that lives behind the eyes, quiet and deep, like rainwater resting in a well. Full, but still. I stood, careful not to disturb the small relics, and drew the sheet back over the vanity, not to hide it, but to tuck it in Dot as I turned to leave. Something caught the corner of my vision, an old photograph pinned beneath the edge of a folded blanket. I picked it up, Dot. It was of her, much younger than I'd ever seen her, standing in a field of tall grass with the sun behind her, arms outstretched like wings. There was laughter caught mid-breath on her lips. I carried it downstairs like it was made of glass, Dot, back in the sitting room. I placed it beside the teacup that remained untouched on the table. The rain outside was beginning to thin, becoming less a song and more a whisper. I curled back into the window seat, the photograph near my heart, and let myself breathe. The attic had given me something, not an answer. Not closure. Just a piece of her I didn't know I still needed. And sometimes that's enough. Evening began to settle in slowly, like a soft blanket unfurling across the sky. The rain, though quieter now, still painted gentle strokes against the windows. Light dimmed to a grayish blue, and the corners of the house deepened with shadow. I didn't turn on the overhead lights, just the little lamp by the window, casting its usual amber glow, flickering slightly as if remembering something. I sat still for a long while. Outside, puddles mirrored the sky. The garden shimmered under a light mist, each leaf beaded with water, trembling like it had just exhaled. I could hear frogs beginning their chorus somewhere in the distance, their low, rhythmic song threading itself through the last traces of rain. The house, too, had changed with the hour, where afternoon had held memories like soft echoes. The evening held something quieter like understanding, as if the house, after all these years, still knew how to listen without asking. Every wooden creak beneath my feet earlier now felt like a nod. Every sigh of wind through the walls, a murmur of recognition. I rose from the window seat and walked slowly down the hallway, my fingertips brushing the wallpaper as I passed. Each step took me past familiar things, the narrow bookshelf with its leaning novels, the dusty vase with the silk flowers no one ever replaced, the coat hook with a single knitted scarf still hanging from it. Her scarf, pale yellow, soft, with one end frayed where the yarn had come undone. I stopped, reached for it, held it up to my face, and breathed in whatever scent it still carried. Something faint, perhaps lavender, or just the smell of time itself, quiet and clean. I wrapped it loosely around my neck and continued to the bedroom, her bedroom. I hesitated at the door. It was still half open, just as she always left it, so the house can breathe, she'd say. I pushed gently, and it swung open without a sound. The room was just as she left it. A quilted bedspread, patterned with pale roses. The rocking chair near the window, with the cushion I had picked out for her one Christmas. A half-burnt candle in a ceramic holder on the dresser. The wax melted down the side like a frozen waterfall. Everything still in its place, untouched by time, but held together by it. I stepped inside, the floor groaning softly under my feet. On the bedside table sat a small book. Not a novel, but a journal. One of those simple, cloth-covered notebooks she'd always kept close. I remembered watching her write in it early in the morning, sometimes just before bed, as if putting thoughts on paper helped her release them into the world. Sat on the edge of the bed and opened it carefully. Her handwriting greeted me like a familiar voice, neat loops, the occasional crossed-out word, and always a date in the corner. Some entries were short, rain today. Biscuits turned out just right. Thought of A. Others stretched longer, recounting a dream she'd had, a memory from her childhood, or reflections about time, loss, love. One page stopped me. It was written in darker ink, the pen pressed a little harder than usual. There is something about rainy afternoons that feels like truth. They don't demand. They don't hurry. They just arrive soft, certain, and willing to stay. I hope one day, when I'm no longer in this house, the rain will remember me. I hope someone I love sits where I sat, drinks what I drank, and feels what I felt. And if they do, then I am not gone. I placed my hand gently over the ink, as if to hold her words in place. Outside, thunder rumbled low and far away, just a breath of sound. Enough to remind me of the world beyond these walls, but not enough to pull me out of this one. I closed the journal and returned it to the table, and then I lay back on the bed. Just for a moment, the scarf still wrapped around my shoulders. The pillow held the faintest imprint of her. Whether real or imagined didn't matter. I let my eyes close, and for the first time in a long while, I felt. Still dot, not empty. Not sad dot, just still. The way a lake becomes when the wind forgets it. The room breathed with me dot, and the rain kept falling softly. Kindly, as if it too had been waiting for this moment. When I woke, it was dark. Not the deep, uneasy kind of dark that comes with city nights and heavy thoughts, but a soft, velvety darkness, like being held in a familiar dream. The only light came from the window, the moon, just a sliver, glancing through the clouds, and the occasional flicker of distant lightning far off beyond the hills. The rain had thinned to a quiet drizzle, steady, rhythmic, like breath in sleep. I sat up slowly, the old bed creaking beneath me dot for a moment. I didn't move. There was something about the quiet that made me want to listen. Not for sounds, but for feelings. For the echo of the day, still lingering in the folds of the quilt, in the creases of the journal on the knitstand, in the memory of cinnamon still tucked beneath my tongue, slipped off the bed and padded barefoot down the hall. The scarf was still around my shoulders. I passed the kitchen, dim now, the smell of earlier baking lingering like a gentle ghost. The teacups were still where I had left them. I could have cleaned them. I could have turned on the light and moved through the motions of tidying up, but I didn't. Some messes weren't messes. Some were simply pieces of a moment still unfolding. I opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. The air was damp and cool, fresh from the storm's touch. The wind had calmed to a whisper, and the garden shimmered in the moonlight, tiny droplets clinging to leaves like silver pearls. The swing creaked slightly in the breeze, slow and lazy, as if it too were remembering. I sat dot. The quilted cushion beneath me was damp at the edges, but I didn't mind. I tucked my legs up and wrapped the scarf a little tighter. My fingers traced the worn armrest, polished smooth by years of hands before mine, and I breathed dot deep, slow, full dot. There was something sacred about sitting on that porch after a storm, as if the world, freshly washed, was offering itself to be seen again. Not as new, but as enough. The trees no longer shook. The rain no longer raced. Even the thunder had fallen quiet. And in that stillness, something in me let go. I didn't even know I'd been holding on so tightly. Memories, regrets, questions. All of it, the way I'd left things. The things I never said. The calls missed, the letters never sent, the visits postponed into silence. They didn't scream at me. They didn't accuse. They just settled. Like leaves after the wind has passed, I closed my eyes and listened, not just to the rain, but to everything underneath it. The hum of the earth, the creak of the porch beams, the distant chirp of crickets who knew the storm had ended. And then I whispered, to no one in particular, I remember. I didn't say when I remembered. I didn't have to. The house knew. The porch knew. The rain knew. A small breeze lifted the edge of the scarf around my neck, brushing my cheek like a hand. I smiled gently into the dark. Somewhere inside, I knew this would be the last night I spent in this house for a while. Life would pull me back soon into cities and screens and morning alarms. But this porch, this quiet, this rain, it would stay with me, like a note held at the end of a song, like a warmth you carry long after the fire goes out. I opened my eyes once more and looked up. The clouds were beginning to part, just slightly, revealing stars behind them small, blinking lights scattered like distant thoughts. The moonlight painted the edges of the porch in silver, and the puddles below gleamed like tiny mirrors. I reached down, touched the wooden floor beneath me, and whispered again, thank you. Not to the house, not to her, not to the rain dot, but to the moment, because somehow, in all its quietness, it had healed something I hadn't even realized was broken. Morning arrived without fanfare. No bright burst of sunlight, no dramatic shift in the air, just a subtle lightening of the sky, like someone slowly turning up the dimmer switch on a soft lamp. The rain had finally stopped, leaving everything outside glazed and still. Drops clung to the porch railing, to the petals of the garden flowers, to the web of a spider tucked under the eaves. Inside the house, silence greeted me like an old friend. I moved through it gently, as though not to wake something sacred. The wooden floor cool beneath my feet, the walls quietly holding their breath. I made my way to the kitchen and put the kettle on without thinking, my hands moving from memory more than need. The motions grounded me. The clink of the lid, the sound of water, the click of the stove dot. While the water warmed, I stood at the sink, looking out the window. The world looked new dot, not in the way a place changes, but in the way perception softens after grief has been named and held. The garden was the same as yesterday, overgrown and glistening, but it no longer looked tired. It looked full, lush. Alive dot, there was a sense of quiet joy in the way the leaves curved under the weight of the water, in the way the light stretched through the lingering mist. It felt like the kind of morning that asks for no ambition, only presence. The kettle whistled dot. I poured the water into the same chipped mug I'd used yesterday and let the tea steep without stirring. No need to rush. No need to fill the silence. I brought the cup to the sitting room, cradled it in both hands, and sat in the window seat one last time. Dot, the cushion remembered me. Dot, outside, birds had returned. Tentative at first, just one or two hopping through the wet grass, shaking their feathers. Then more, singing softly, as if testing the air. It was still too early for the street to stir. No cars, no voices, only nature, slowly waking up. I sipped the tea and let the warmth spread through me. Dot, the photograph I'd brought down from the attic still sat on the side table, beside the book and the empty teacup from the day before. I picked it up again, studied her smile, and realized something quietly miraculous. I wasn't sad. I missed her, yes, would always miss her. But the ache had softened into something tender, something like gratitude. I set the photo down and reached for the journal once more. There were blank pages in the back. I hadn't planned to write anything, but the pen was there, resting where she must have left it. I opened to the last empty page and wrote. I came back. The house remembered me. The rain spoke gently. You were everywhere, and I am carrying you with me now, not in pain, but in peace. I signed it with just my first initial, the way she always had. Then I closed the journal and left it on the table, just slightly askew, the way she used to do when she knew she'd return to it soon. Outside, the clouds began to shift. Pale beams of sunlight filtered through, catching on raindrops like strands of glass. The porch swings stirred, not from wind, but as though rising from a long, satisfying sleep. I stood, tea still in hand, and walked out to the front steps. From here, I could see the whole garden, the roof tiles still slick with rain, the sky opening in slow, hopeful arcs. The scarf around my shoulders lifted slightly in the breeze. I knew it was time to go. Dot, not to leave her behind, but to take her forward with me. In every soft moment, in every cup of tea, in every quiet rainstorm that whispered on my window pane. I turned back, looked once more at the house, its windows blinking in the morning light, its walls glowing faintly with memory, and I whispered, just loud enough for the day to hear, I'll be back. And the wind, gentle and sure, seemed to answer, we know. The road away from Grandma's house wound slowly through the hills, lined with trees that still dripped rain from their branches. My car rolled along quietly, tires hissing over damp asphalt, windshield wipers keeping time like a metronome set to remember. Every bend in the road felt familiar, not just in direction, but in mood. It was as if the land itself understood the weight of goodbyes. I Didn't play any music, Dot. There was something about silence after saying farewell that felt necessary. Like letting the moment settle into your bones before the noise of the world crept back in. I left the window cracked just slightly, letting in the scent of wet pine and distant chimney smoke. It smelled like fall, even though it wasn't. Maybe that's what grief does, it rearranges the seasons inside you, making room for warmth in the cold and quiet in the middle of noise. Dot. As I drove, I passed landmarks from years gone by. The little white church with the crooked bell tower, the faded red barn leaning into the wind, the field where fireflies used to rise like tiny lanterns each summer evening. I slowed when I reached the old bridge, the one that arched over the shallow creek, where we used to skip stones. I pulled over, not for long, just enough. The rain had stopped completely now, though the sky remained soft and overcast. I stepped out and stood by the railing, the wood damp beneath my hands. Below, the creek burbled over smooth stones, the water clearer than I remembered. Dot. It had been years since I stood there. I looked down and smiled as I saw the smooth gray rocks beneath the surface. We'd collected them as kids, each one with a name. Wishes, we used to call them. Grandma had believed in that if you held a stone warm in your palm long enough, it would take your hopes and carry them quietly into the world. Picked one up now. Dot. Small, cool, perfectly round. I closed my fingers around it and thought not of wishes, exactly, but of moments, of cinnamon mornings and handwritten journals, and the hush of tea steeping in a house wrapped in rain. I thought of all the times I didn't return, and all the ways she waited for me anyway. And then I dropped the stone into the water. Dot. It landed with a soft plop, sending ripples outward in concentric circles, gentle, endless. Like memory itself. Back in the car, I drove on. Town appeared slowly, buildings rising from the mist, traffic lights blinking into the quiet. I saw people now walking dogs, carrying groceries, heading somewhere with purpose. Life moving forward, as it always does. Dot. And yet I felt different. Not changed in the dramatic sense, but quietly shifted, like a book placed back on the shelf, slightly askew, holding a folded letter between its pages. When I arrived home, the light was beginning to fade again. That late afternoon hush settling into the walls. I set down my bag, kicked off my shoes, and walked straight to the kitchen. The kettle went on. I pulled the chamomile from the back of the cupboard, the one I never used, and placed it in a mug. The scent rose as the water poured over it, the same gentle steam curling up like a thread, reaching for somewhere beyond the ceiling. I carried the mug to the living room, sat by the window, and opened the one book I'd brought with, The Secret Garden. Tucked inside was her photograph. I'd slipped it between the pages before leaving, just as she'd once hidden my watercolor there years ago. The page it rested on? Chapter 11, again. I smiled. Outside, clouds had begun to drift apart, and sunlight reached through in long golden fingers. It caught on the edges of my tea, on the surface of the mug, on the glass of the window pane. And in the stillness of that moment, I realized something simple and true. Grief, when steeped long enough in love, becomes quiet joy. It doesn't leave, but it changes shape. It folds itself into rainstorms, into old books, into the silence after tea is poured. It walks beside you, not behind. I sipped my tea and whispered, not out loud, but in the language only the heart understands. I remember, and I will keep remembering. Evening came gently that day, slipping into the room without needing to knock, without I hadn't turned on any lights. I didn't need to. The soft glow of the setting sun filtered in through the window, casting long amber streaks across the floor, gilding the rim of my teacup, and resting lightly on the photograph of her face smiling. Always smiling. I stayed by the window, legs curled beneath me. The book still open in my lap, though I hadn't read a word in a while. The words had begun to blur anyway, not from tears, but from something slower, something deeper. The kind of soft that comes not from sadness, but from full-hearted remembering. I looked out, watching the last light of day flicker across the buildings, the way it always does before it finally gives in to night. And in that in-between moment, between day and dark, between past and now, I began to write. Not in a journal, not on a screen, just quietly in my mind. A letter, not to her exactly, but to the version of me that still needed to sit by the rain and remember who she had been. Dear you, there will be days when you forget the smell of the garden after the rain, when the sound of her humming seems far away, when the ache of missing her sneaks in between sips of tea or folds itself into a late-night silence. But there will also be days like this, where the rain returns not to haunt you, but to hold you, where every creaking floorboard, every faded page, every amber glow evening brings her closer, not further. You do not need to hold her tightly. You only need to listen to the soft quiet, between raindrops, to the kettle's whisper, to the swing creaking on the porch. Even when no one sits there, let the memories rise and fall like the tide. Let the tears come gently, without apology. And when the storm passes, because it will step out into the stillness and look up, find her in the light that filters through the clouds. In the warmth of cinnamon. In the hush of a home that remembers you. And you'll know you never walked away from her. You just carried her forward. Always calm me. I breathed out slowly after that, as if the letter had cleared a space inside me I didn't know was cluttered. And in that moment, I didn't feel weighed down by grief. I felt wrapped in it, the way a quilt wraps you on a stormy night, not to bury, but to comfort. Outside, the street lights flickered on one by one. A gentle hum filled the room. I stood, stretched, and walked into the kitchen, rinsing the empty cup, placing it upside down on the drying rack. And then I paused, hand still resting on the counter, and smiled, because for the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid of forgetting. I wasn't afraid of the quiet. I knew now, memory isn't something that fades when we're not looking. It's something that waits patiently for us to return. To a porch swing, to a journal, to a single drop of rain tapping at the window. I turned off the tap and walked toward the bedroom, switching off the last of the lights as I passed. The room greeted me with softness. The bed already turned down, the air just cool enough to make the blanket feel like a welcome embrace. I climbed in and pulled it up to my chest, closing my eyes. Somewhere, far off, thunder rolled faintly again, but it didn't feel ominous. It felt like a lullaby. And as I drifted off, wrapped in stillness and tea-sweet memory, I imagined her voice one more time, soft, steady and familiar. Sleep well, my love. I'm always here, in the rain, in the quiet, in you. And I believed her. The next morning arrived hushed, as if the world was still deciding whether to wait. Light filtered through sheer curtains in pale brushstrokes, gently dusting the room with colorless warmth. I stirred beneath the covers, not because of alarm or urgency, but because the air had shifted just slightly, the way it does after a long night of rain. I didn't reach for my phone, didn't move quickly. I just lay there a moment longer, listening. It was quiet, not empty, not lonely, just still. The kind of stillness that lives in early hours, before engines growl on streets, before doors open and conversations begin. A soft, respectful kind of silence, as if the world itself had tiptoed around me, letting me rest. When I finally rose, the wooden floor met my feet like an old friend, cool, familiar, unchanged. I padded into the kitchen, muscle memory guiding my hands. Kettle, water, stove. The same steps. The same calm. As the water began to heat, I leaned against the counter, and looked out the window. The sky had cleared. It wasn't bright not yet, but the clouds had thinned to pale whispers, drifting like leftover dreams across a morning sky. Drops of water still clung to the window pane, like the rain had left behind a message in its own delicate script. I took it in slowly, letting the sight settle. Sometimes it's not what you see that holds you, it's what you feel while seeing it. The kettle whistled. I prepared the tea 1 cup this time and carried it to the living room, returning instinctively to the window seat. The cushion gave a soft sigh beneath me, the same way it always had. I sipped, and as I did, I noticed something, an urge I hadn't felt in a long time to write. Not to anyone, not even to myself, but to the quiet, to the rain, to the version of me that had sat in that window as a child, sketching daisies and storm clouds, believing that the world would always wait for me to grow. I set the cup down and reached for the small notebook I'd tucked into my bag before leaving Grandma's house. I hadn't planned to write in it just to keep it near, but now it felt right. The page opened with a soft crackle, and I began. This morning, the house is quiet, not because it's empty, but because it's full with memory, with peace, with a gentle scent of tea and dust. The rain has gone, but it left something behind in me, a calm I didn't expect, a knowing that grief doesn't end, but softens. I carry her now, not as weight, but as warmth. I paused, pen resting in hand, eyes drifting back to the window. A bird landed on the railing outside, small, puffed up, feathers damp at the edges. It looked around once, chirped once, and flew off again into the morning light. I smiled. There had been a time I would have taken a photo, captured the moment, shared it, but now I simply watched, because some moments aren't meant to be saved, they're meant to be lived. Finished with my tea, I stood and opened the window, just a crack. Fresh air spilled and cool and clean, laced with petrichor and budding light. It curled around me like a second breath, and in that moment, I realized something else. The healing had happened in one night. It had happened slowly, quietly, like rain softening the soil, like memory folding itself gently into my days. It had happened in steam, in attic dust, in the creak of stairs, in a scarf draped around my shoulders, and that meant it would stay, not forever in this intensity, but always in small ways. In my rituals, in my stillness, in my stories. Closed the notebook and pressed my palm gently against its cover, sealing something in place, something sacred. Not for the world, just for me, and for her, always for her. Later that day, I found myself wandering through the small park near my apartment. It wasn't intentional. I had stepped out for groceries, and somehow my feet chose a different direction. The kind of choice you don't question, one that seems made by memory more than mine. The air was still damp, holding on to the rain from the day before. Leaves glistened. Benches wore little puddles in their wooden seats. Birds fluttered between branches, shaking droplets loose and tiny. Glittering arcs. It smelled like yesterday. Like her porch, like that window seat, like chamomile and the last page of a letter. I slowed my pace and followed the path lined with mossy stones and low, flowering bushes. There weren't many people. Just one older man walking his dog. A woman in a long coat, eyes on the clouds. Everyone moved slowly, reverently, as if they too felt the hush that rain leaves behind. I came to a bench under a large elm tree, its limbs heavy with moisture. The ground below littered with golden leaves beginning to dry at the edges. There was no reason to rush home. The grocery list could wait. The dishes in the sink weren't going anywhere. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the familiar tug of tasks undone. I felt still. Around me, the world seemed to agree. A breeze moved through the trees, gentle enough not to disturb, strong enough to whisper. I leaned back, let my shoulders relax, and looked up through the canopy above Dot. The clouds were parting in slow motion. Not a dramatic clearing, just a gentle stretch of sky peeking through. Pale blue and soft like linen sheets hung out to dry. The kind of sky that doesn't ask for your attention, but rewards it anyway. I thought of her then, not sharply, not with longing, just. As presence? I imagined her walking that path in front of me, hands tucked into the pockets of her cardigan, stopping to examine a fallen leaf or a crooked stone. She had a way of finding beauty in the most ordinary things. A crack in the pavement, the hum of bees, the worn spine of a book at a garage sale. I remembered something she once told me years ago, as we sat watching the rain together from her porch. You don't need to chase meaning. Sometimes it comes to you when you sit still long enough. I hadn't understood it then, but here, now, on this damp bench beneath an elm tree, in a park I hadn't meant to visit, I did. It wasn't about the house, or the attic. Or the biscuits. It was about the way I had shown up, the way I had sat with memory, let it unfold, and stayed, not run from it, not tried to fix it, just honored it. I took a deep breath, feeling the coolness settle into my lungs. The scarf was still around my neck. I hadn't meant to wear it out, but it was there, warm and soft and smelling faintly of cedar and old cotton. Her scent. I closed my eyes for a moment and listened, not for voices, not for signs, not just for the sound of the wind threading its way through branches. And I smiled because I realized something else. She had been teaching me all along, not through lessons, not through words written down, but through the way she lived, through the space she created, the warmth she offered, the quiet she invited. She had been preparing me for this, for grief, for stillness, for carrying on with softness, not armor. I opened my eyes again, and the sky had opened just a little more. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang. Not loud, not urgent, just a reminder. Time continues. Whether we rush to meet it or not, I stood, stretching gently, brushing a leaf from my coat. And then I walked back the way I came, not hurried, not heavy. Just present, the way she would have wanted. When I arrived home that evening, the apartment felt different, not changed in any physical way. Nothing had moved, no lights left on, no windows cracked. But the space itself seemed softer, like the echoes had softened, like something in the walls had exhaled. It was as if the quiet I'd found in Grandma's house had followed me home and was now gently settling in. I slipped off my coat, hung the scarf by the door, and paused just for a moment. The scent of rain was still in the fabric. Faint, but they're like old wood and mist and something gently sweet. I brushed my fingers along the edge of the wool, then let it hang. Not like an artifact, but like something ready to be used again. In the kitchen, I moved without thought, not rushed, not distracted, just present. I filled the kettle, pulled out the same chamomile I'd used that morning, and placed a single teacup on the counter, the same one I used when I returned home from the house. I'd washed it since, but not put it away. I wasn't sure why. Maybe because it had already found its place, just like everything else that had quietly shifted inside me. As the kettle warmed, I turned on the small lamp in the corner. Its light wasn't much, but it was enough. That had been her way, hadn't it? Enough, enough warmth, enough kindness, enough presence to turn even the simplest moment into something that stayed with you. The kettle whistled. I poured the water over the dried blossoms and watched them bloom, just as they always did, releasing their soft, golden color like a secret shared between friends. I carried the cup into the living room and sat on the couch, legs tucked beneath me. The windows were dark now. Street lights flickered outside, casting halos on wet pavement. Every so often, the sound of distant footsteps passed by, someone returning home, someone out walking off their own thoughts. I wrapped both hands around the mug and breathed in the steam, and I thought of her hands, warm, always warm, even when I was small, and the world felt uncertain. Her hands never trembled. They held everything with the same quiet grace. Teacups, letters, grief, joy, me. She never rushed. I didn't fully understand that until now. Her life was stitched together from moments like these, not grand, not loud, but full of intention. She understood something I'd spent most of my life racing past. That peace doesn't come from what you achieve, it comes. From how you notice, how you show up, how you sit with the rain. Instead of running from it, I looked around my apartment, then noticing things I'd once rushed past. The chip mug I always meant to replace, the book on the table I never finished, but kept anyway because I liked the way its cover felt in my hands. The candle by the windowsill, half used, its wick curled and waiting, and I smiled because for the first time, I didn't feel like I was holding on to these things to remember her. I was simply living the way she had taught me, to without ever saying it, without ever needing. 2. I finished my tea in silence, because I had nothing to say, but because some evenings asked you to sit quietly beside yourself and just be. And I honored that. When I rose, I rinsed the mug, dried it with the soft cloth she'd once embroidered, and placed it gently back on the shelf, not away, just home. Then I turned off the lamp and walked to the bedroom, letting the stillness follow me like a hush outside. Rain had not returned, but I knew it would. And when it did, I would be ready not with sorrow, but with open arms, with a cup steeping beside me, and a heart that now knew how to stay soft, even in the quiet. That night, I dreamed of the porch, not exactly as it was, but close enough that my heart knew it before my eyes did. The swing moved in slow, measured arcs, even though there was no wind. The chimes hung still, but their soft music floated through the air like memory given shape. The sky above was neither day nor night, just a soft gray pink, the kind that belongs only to dreams, or the few moments just before dawn in the dream. I sat wrapped in the yellow scarf, hands curled around a cup I didn't remember pouring, but it was warm, familiar, and across from me, where she used to sit, there was a space not empty, but glowing faintly, like it was filled with something too gentle to take form. I didn't speak, neither did she, and yet everything was said. We sat like that for a long while, with the hush of dream rain just beginning in the distance, its rhythm as steady and kind as breath. The scent of cinnamon and old wood rose with it, curling between us like a lullaby. It wasn't sadness I felt. It wasn't longing, either. It was fullness, the kind that only comes when you realize you are no longer looking backward, but simply holding something precious without needing to clutch it tight. When I woke, the room was still dim, early morning. Light hadn't yet reached the corners of the apartment. The world beyond the window was wrapped in a foggy silence, but I felt calm. More than that, I felt ready, not for anything in particular, just ready to live softly, to move slowly, to pay attention, the way she had. I stretched beneath the covers and watched the ceiling, my mind quiet in a way that used to feel impossible. For years, sleep had been something I fought for, something chased through noise and worry and overthinking. But now, sleep had become an old porch swing on a rainy evening. Now, waking had become the scent of tea and pages turning. I rose and walked barefoot to the kitchen, every step steady, intentional. The kettle, as always, greeted me like an old friend. The chamomile waited patiently on the shelf. And I knew then, This would be my ritual, not out of obligation, but out of love. A way to honor her. A way to anchor myself. A way to meet the quiet mornings with open hands. As the tea steeped, I opened the window slightly. The air that rushed in was cool, touched by moisture, filled with the scent of something distant but familiar. I closed my eyes and listened. It wasn't raining yet, but it would. And when it did, I would sit by the window and welcome it in, not for the nostalgia, not for the ache, but for the gift it always carried. A reminder to slow down. To return. To remember. I sipped the tea and felt it settle warmly through me. And with that, I turned the page of my notebook, dipped my pen, and began to write again. Not to anyone, not even to myself. Just to the moment, to the stillness, to the rain that hadn't arrived yet, but always would. It rained that evening. Suddenly no thunder, no warning, but gently, like it had been waiting for the right time to return. I heard it first in the quietest way, a soft tapping on the windowsill, like fingertips drumming thoughtfully. Then on the roof, a rhythmic patter, soothing and familiar, like a song I'd once memorized and forgotten until now. I smiled, almost without meaning to, and without hesitation, I turned off the lamp and sat by the window. No tea this time, no book, just the rain and the room and my breath, all moving at the same slow pace. The light outside had dimmed into a deep slate gray, and the city beyond blurred in streaks of amber and silver. It was the kind of rain that didn't ask for anything, didn't rush, didn't try to cleanse or change or overwhelm. It simply was, and I let it be. I watched droplets chase each other down the glass. Some merged, some parted, some vanished before they reached the sill. It reminded me, in its quiet way, that not all stories are meant to last, but even the smallest ones still leave traces. I thought of her again, not in a heavy way, not even with sorrow, but with softness. She would have loved this rain. She would have made tea and sat with me, probably humming that tune she never quite finished. Or maybe she would have just sat in silence, listening, letting the sound of the world soften everything inside her. That, I think, was her greatest gift. She didn't try to fix the pain around her. She simply made space for it, held it gently, let it breathe, and in doing so, she made space for joy too. I realized, sitting there, how much of her I'd carried home, not just in photographs or journals or recipes, but in my breath, in the way I moved through the quiet, in the way I welcomed the rain, not as disruption, but as presence. I had become a little like her, and that thought didn't scare me. It comforted me, because maybe that's the way we live on, not just in memories, but in how we teach others to stay soft, to slow down, to pay attention to the beauty that hides inside ordinary days. The rain deepened, turning into a steady hush that wrapped around the building like a shawl. Street lights shimmered in puddles below. A single car passed, its tires hissing over the wet road, then vanished into the distance. I didn't want to capture the moment, didn't want to write it down or record the sound. I just wanted to sit with it, to feel it fully, to let it press gently against whatever was left inside me that hadn't yet softened. And it did, with every drop, with every breath. Eventually, I stood, closed the window gently, and let the room return to silence. I didn't feel the need to speak or reflect, or even understand. I simply felt peaceful, not because the grief was gone, but because it no longer needed to be resisted. I carried it now the way rain carries light, quietly, almost invisibly, until it touches the glass and reveals the shape of something sacred. That night, as I climbed into bed, I left the window open just a crack, letting in the cool air, the scent of rain, the gentle rhythm of something older than sorrow. And as I drifted toward sleep, I whispered not to her, not to myself, but to the moment, "You're welcome here, always." And the rain, in its soft reply, said nothing, but stayed,